Would you dare enter a neighborhood where not even the police feel safe? Today, I'm taking you to the 5 most dangerous neighborhoods in the world, where laws barely exist and daily life feels like an action movie, but without a happy ending. And let me explain why these places are so extreme and why, despite everything, people still live there. Without further ado, let's dive into the first one. Petare, Caracas, Venezuela. Our first stop is Caracas, Venezuela, one of the most dangerous cities in the world. In this city, one neighborhood stands out with the worst reputation, Petare. And it's no wonder, as here, violence isn't just a statistic, it's a daily reality. Petare, originally named Sweet Name of Jesus of Petare, a name that, ironically, now sounds like a distant memory, has turned into a place where no one wants to be once night falls. This neighborhood is one of the largest slums in Latin America. Picture a hillside crowded with shacks and alleys so narrow that sunlight barely reaches them. Here, homes are stacked on top of each other, creating a real maze where law barely exists. And the most shocking part is that, in this maze, violence is part of daily life. To give you an idea, it's estimated that between 30 and 60 murders occur in Petare every week. So, in case you were wondering, this is definitely not a place for tourism. The statistics are clear. This neighborhood has one of the highest homicide rates in Caracas, and the situation only worsens with the lack of resources and opportunities. Without jobs and with few alternatives, many young people end up entangled in gang violence, which practically rules the area. Here, the gangs set the rules, and the police barely dare to intervene. The streets are controlled by factions deciding who comes in and who goes out, and the control is so strict that locals learn to survive by avoiding certain areas or following unofficial codes of conduct. For many residents, this order imposed by the gangs is one of the few forms of security they know. But without a doubt, it's a security based on fear and oppression. And the reality is even harsher. In Petare, the living conditions are so tough that poverty and the lack of basic services add to the violence. Access to clean water is limited, healthcare is nearly non-existent, and unemployment affects almost every family. Imagine living in an area where every day is a struggle to get the basics, and where violence is ever present. This not only affects those who live there, but also has a profound impact on the city of Caracas as a whole. Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. This is one of the craziest things you'll hear, but this is Port Moresby, the capital of Papua New Guinea. In this city, there's only one safe neighborhood, the business center known as Town, while everything else is a danger zone. For this reason, the UN once named it the world's most dangerous city. Can you imagine living in a place where leaving your house could be a risk? Let me explain why this happens. Here's the interesting part. Port Moresby has unemployment rates reaching up to 90% in some neighborhoods. This means that a huge part of the population is trapped in a difficult situation. And what do you think happens when unemployment and poverty reach these levels? Exactly. Problems multiply. This is where the phenomenon of the rascals comes into play. These aren't just any gangs. We're talking about organized groups that impose their own law in neighborhoods like Koki, 4 Mile, Gabutu, and Kila. The reason? To control the area. And it's so extreme that we're not just talking about theft and kidnappings, but homicides as well. So, in these neighborhoods, safety is something rarely mentioned. You may wonder, what about the authorities? The reality is that, in many cases, the police are so limited that they simply avoid entering these areas. It's a never-ending cycle. Gangs control, people live in fear, and the authorities have few resources. This is why, for many residents of Port Moresby, it's often safer to stay home or move, if they can. While researching, I discovered it's not just about the violence. It's as if these neighborhoods operate under their own set of rules. The rascals charge residents for protection, and for those who refuse, well, let's just say the consequences can be serious. It's like a city within a city, where everyone knows that the rascals' law is what prevails. The most incredible thing about Port Moresby is that, despite everything, there are people fighting to improve their communities. People trying to open businesses, keep their families safe, and find hope in a place where, when you think about it, only the strongest seem to survive. Favela Rocinha, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Now we move to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, to the neighborhood of Rocinha, the largest and most famous favela in this city, not just for its size, but also for its history of violence and incredible resilience. Rocinha is home to over 70,000 people in such a crowded space that from a distance, it looks like a hillside of houses stacked with no apparent order. This favela was once considered the world's most dangerous, and its reality remains so complex that it's hard to imagine what its residents face daily. Rocinha reached such a critical level of violence that in 2011, the Brazilian government made a drastic decision. They sent over 700 police officers to try to regain control of the area. Think about what it means for a neighborhood to need such a large police force just to prevent crime and drug trafficking from dominating every corner. What did this intervention achieve? Well, to some extent, Rocinha gained some stability. Enough, at least, to allow organized tourist routes within the favela. But this peace is more apparent than it seems. And here's where things get complicated. Rocinha isn't just a large favela. It's a battleground between two major drug trafficking factions fighting for control of the streets and the drug market. Here, each faction has its own areas and rules, and the tension is constant. Although the police attempt to maintain order, this ongoing turf war defines daily life in Rocinha, and any small incident can trigger a wave of violence in seconds. Despite the police presence, illegal substances and violence are still a daily reality in Rocinha. This isn't a place where law and order hold full control. Rather, it's a community where life continues amid constant risk and adaptation to a reality where danger is always just around the corner. Many Rocinha residents have learned to survive, to move cautiously, and to be aware of the boundaries set by the different gangs. And here comes one of the most surprising things. Amid all this tension, Rocinha has also become a tourist destination. That's right. Tourists from around the world come to see up close what life is like in one of Brazil's most iconic favelas. It's a surreal contrast, because while some tourists snap photos of the view of Rio from the favela just steps away, the people who live there continue to face daily issues of violence and poverty. This duality is part of what makes Rocinha so unique and unsettling at the same time. Neighborhood Medina, San Pedro Sula, Honduras. Our next stop is San Pedro Sula, the Honduran city that sadly earned the nickname the crime capital. In this place, the neighborhood of Medina stands out not only for its poverty and lack of services, but also because it's one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in all of Honduras. With an average of 3 homicides a day, Medina accounts for a significant portion of the violence in a city already considered one of the most dangerous in the world. Here, fear and extortion are the currency of the day, and the situation only keeps getting worse. To understand the extent of the problem, just look at the numbers. In 2012, San Pedro Sula had a homicide rate of 170 per 100,000 inhabitants, a staggering figure that has continued to rise. In that year alone, out of a population of 719,000 people, over 1,200 lost their lives. And in the neighborhood of Medina, this level of violence is a daily reality, something that defines the lives of those who reside here. The 15 streets that make up this neighborhood concentrate a large share of the city's homicides. This is where the situation turns even darker. In Medina, gangs known as the Maras call the shots. They don't just dominate the streets, they charge what they call a tax to residents, simply for allowing them to live in their own homes. This is addictive for them because it gives them total power over the neighborhood. It's not that people accept this tax willingly, of course, but the alternative is risking their lives. This happens, and as a result, each resident learns to move with extreme caution to avoid provoking the gang's wrath. And let me tell you something, violence isn't the only challenge here. Medina is also one of the poorest areas in San Pedro Sula. Here, the lack of basic services like drinking water, employment, and healthcare turns daily life into a test of endurance. This might sound confusing, but it's really simple. Each day that residents survive here is almost a miracle. Crime and poverty feed off each other, and that's how Medina becomes a trap that few manage to escape. Tepito, Mexico City, Mexico. Our 5th stop is Tepito, in the heart of Mexico City. This neighborhood isn't just one of the most dangerous, but also one of the most enigmatic and well-known throughout Mexico. At first glance, it looks like a giant market where you can find everything, from clothes and electronics to food and contraband. But behind this facade lies one of the harshest and most dangerous realities in the city. To give you an idea, Tepito is known as El Barrio Bravo for a reason. For decades, it's been the center of informal commerce and a haven for gangs and criminal groups. It's a place where the residents themselves set the rules, as the police barely dare to intervene. The locals have developed a kind of resilience and pride that goes beyond what many would imagine, partly due to their history. Tepito has a very interesting history that few people know. This neighborhood dates back to the pre-Hispanic era and has been a point of resistance and popular culture throughout the years. This is where things get even more interesting. Why? Because the police don't have total control, so the residents have built a culture of mutual protection. Here, crime is something the residents deal with daily. Gangs control various areas of the neighborhood, and the illegal drug trade is a reality. Locals are used to living under this constant tension, which is why they develop a kind of sixth sense for avoiding trouble. Why is it so hard for the police to intervene? Well, Tepito has a very complex internal organization. In many cases, the gangs have their own rules and even a code of loyalty that residents must respect to stay out of trouble. So, you might wonder, how do families and regular people survive here? This is where things get even more fascinating. Well, as I dug deeper into Tepito, I realized something incredibly interesting. There's a really clever tactic that many locals use to protect themselves: support networks among neighbors. Imagine it as a kind of unofficial protection network, where everyone has each other's back. Of course, this doesn't always work, but it's a way to survive in a neighborhood where the law doesn't always reach. It's almost as if each resident is part of an early warning system. If someone who doesn't belong to the neighborhood enters, or if there are unusual movements, people know immediately. It's something that's in plain sight, but that many don't see. A sort of invisible alert that allows them to stay safe in an environment where the law has little power. Now that we've toured some of the world's most dangerous neighborhoods and cities, places where violence, poverty, and gang or armed group control take charge, I'd love to hear your opinion. Which of these places impacted you the most? Do you think there's hope to change these realities? Leave your comment below, because I want to know what you think. And if you'd like to explore more stories of extreme places and discover the realities millions of people face around the world, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay up to date with my upcoming videos. See you on the next adventure. Get ready to uncover more of those hidden corners few dare to see.